what are we going to do to have clean water and clean air in this country for the next 100 years, and how are we going to structure our economy?
To defend the quality and improve the quality and sanitize the quality of air, water, and soil, I think any sane person agrees with that.
Right.
And I will not yield to anybody here in my enthusiasm for that.
What would you have been if you weren't a successful musician?
And my answer?
An unsuccessful musician. I know.
Russia is not strong enough to subdue all of the Ukraine, and the most Putin can do is take in some of the Russian ethnic fringe.
From the Zoomerplex in historic Liberty Village, The Zoomer with Conrad Black and Denise Scanlon.
Greetings, everyone. Welcome to The Zoomer. So Moses Neimer calls this place where we're shooting the environment. And today we're going to shoot the show on the environment, in the environment.
And Denise, you have a conversation with Randy Bachman, who's about to be inducted into the Canadian Music Hall of Fame with Bachman Turner Overdrive.
I do. He's going to be right over there in just a minute. Randy's got a new book called Tales from Beyond the Tap. So Conrad, let's do the reveal, as they say, right off the top, because, you know, we're friends, we're co-hosts, we share the same dressing room. Actually, we don't have a dressing room. But yet, when it comes to climate change, you and I are on different sides of the page.
Well, we both agree that the environment's important, but after that, there's a certain, if you'll pardon the word, bifurcation.
A certain bifurcation, yes. Well, hopefully we can agree without being disagreeable today.
Well,
let's tee up the topic.
In the debate about global warming, climate change, words have become code for the stance you take. Are you an alarmist or a denier? A skeptic or an activist? Perhaps you're a consensus challenger. Contrarian has a nice ring to it. No, it doesn't. Are you with Big Oil or Big Green? Do you call it Fort McMurray or Fort McMoney? Oil sands, tar sands, dirty oil, ethical oil. Perhaps you'd prefer the new artisanal organic bitumen flavor. How do you describe your science? Unsettled or irrefutable? Is climate change natural or anthropogenic? And would you like reductionist or geoengineered solutions with that? Oh yeah, and one more question. How do you feel about Neil Young's music?
Okay, let's start with the science. So just before Christmas, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, also known as the IPCC, released their latest preliminary report. And basically they said the atmosphere is warming, the sea levels are rising, the Arctic ice is melting, the oceans are more acidic. So Conrad, it sounds like it's not a freak of nature here, but you're skeptical of the IPCC. Why?
Well, in fairness, I think that, look, I don't want to be glib. There are all sorts of opportunities to exaggerate and really torque things up, but at least momentarily resist that temptation. But some of the things that you just imputed to them have been effectively debunked. The global warming that they alerted us to turned out to be 1 centigrade degree in the last 70 years, and nothing in the last 20 years.
I think it's important when you say, look, only 1 centigrade over 70 years. It doesn't sound like a lot. But we have to consider that the difference in global average temperature between now and the last ice age was 5 degrees Celsius.
But the fact is the polar ice cap is returning, the water levels are not going up, Tuvalu is not sinking, and there is no global warming.
That is nonsense, scientifically, what you're just saying. I'm sorry.
What you're saying is nonsense.
The polar ice cap, the amount of ice in the Arctic is at an all-time low and is decreasing dramatically. The summertime sea ice. The ice on land is a different issue.
Let's not make this a faith-based argument. This is an evidence-based argument. All of the major national academies of science, from the National Academy of Science in the US, the Canadian Royal Society, the UK Royal Society, you go around the world, and these are independent scientific bodies appointed by, and not just, well, they're recognized by their own scientific academies. They've all been asked by their governments to review IPCC reviews. They've all concluded that man-made global warming has been the cause of the warming we've seen over the last number of decades, and that it will continue to do so, and that it is dangerous.
What the IPCC does, Elizabeth is right, is it does not conduct any research. They get some people together and they say, look at all of this literature and decide what it means. Well, there's a lot of human judgment involved in that. And there's a bit of groupthink that goes on.
We could go on just saying, you know, you're right, you're wrong, I believe you, I don't believe, and so on. But
That's why
we
you should have
can't
to rely on
exactly
the
prove it
science.
here. So
Well, no, and that's why government should be providing forums with due diligence and rules of evidence and expert opinion and taking this seriously like a royal commission, because there is a good reason why people would lie. And usually it's because stakeholders don't want to see the redistribution of their money from their pocket going somewhere else. And when we're dealing with fuels, there's many different types of fuels.
but you accept
there's
there's
alternatives.
stakeholders on both sides here.
Well,
I mean,
stakeholders
Al Gore
on the public,
was a stakeholder
right?
too,
But
you know.
yeah, small player compared to the
not a
billions and
scientist.
billions in coal and
No,
oil. I mean, we're talking about
centimillionaire
the
with a
biggest
Nobel
redistribution of wealth in Canada would occur if we move from being purely based our cars on fossil fuel to something else. This is serious threats to serious companies who have tons of money in their pockets, who can buy ads, who can buy writers, who can go to the TV, and if government doesn't step in there and provide a forum to
Isn't that a
deal with
conspiracy
these,
theory?
it's not a conspiracy because it's called due diligence. It's what democracy is
There's
really
been
about.
no due diligence looked at in terms of the Ontario efforts here to green the rural
then stand up and argue for one. I've been out
we
there
have
arguing
been
for these
arguing.
panels for
Our
years.
group has been fighting for this for 3 years, or
What's
over
that?
4 years. Wind concerns Ontario. We're against.
How did you come up
the
with wind out of what I was talking about determining the
Because
issue
you're
of
talking
climate
about
change?
the big oil
energy.
companies. I'm saying in Ontario, we've already had the government saying that they know better than anybody else.
Listen, my organization as well took on the government with green energy and said we need to have public discourse before you decide where to put these, where to site them, where you should build them. They exempted green energy from that, and it's to their flaw that they've done that, and now they're going to have to deal with it.
Dr. Sally Baliunas is an astrophysicist at Harvard and a climate challenger. Let's see what she has to say. And Dr. McBain, I'm going to come right back to you after
Why don't you show
that.
a real scientist as opposed to that person?
No, let's see her.
She's not a real scientist.
I know of this
They're
person.
making me.
What she or he, I don't even know what it is. Anyway, go ahead.
Given that the Earth has dramatic swings in temperature, it's very hard to say what is normal. First, let's look at thermometer readings. They go back about to the middle of the 19th century over some fraction of the world. But the 19th century is the tail end of the Little Ice Age. To say that the 20th century is unusually warm means you have to say that the 19th century is normal. But when you look back in time, you get a different perspective. The 19th century was abnormally cold, and largely the 20th century could be a rise back out of the unusual cold.
Even your group, and that's an important and respected group, I'm not disparaging, but why did even your section of the scientific community move from global warming to climate change?
Global warming is a media term, which we as scientists have never particularly used nor liked. Because when we talk about climate change, we're talking about not only change in temperature, we're talking about change in precipitation, extreme wind events, extreme hurricanes, typhoons, etc., sea level rise. That's all factors of a changing climate. The warming part is one important, but not the only factor.
If it's carbon pollution that is actually creating these kinds of effects, we should use a term that people can relate to, that they're comfortable with, that understand, and it does, whether that's correct or not.
I'm not comfortable with that. When did a nutrient, something that's absolutely vital to sustain human life and all life on this planet, become a pollutant?
When it got into our fish and you couldn't eat it, when it killed your drinking water, when it filled up with their ashes and the fly ash filled up all your wetlands and habitats, when it created smog in your community.
Carbon dioxide is required for
carbon
plants to
dioxide
grow.
is one of many elements that come out of burning fossil fuel.
And we need
You're trying to
water for-
create a straw man argument that
It's
then
not
coming back and saying, well,
pollution.
CO2 is natural,
There would be no
therefore
life
it's fine.
without carbon dioxide. It is
Fossil
not.
carbon is different from carbon in you and I and in the plants because it's been under the ground for thousands, millions of years. It does not have the same isotope, just to give you a scientific term. So we can actually show, scientists can show, that change from 280 parts per million that we had in the 1800s to the present 400 parts per million is mostly what we call fossil carbon.
And the scientific consensus and the scientific concerns about this
There
issue
is not consensus.
have been.
No, there is.
Consensus
Consensus is not
There's a
unanimity.
consensus amongst
Consensus is
scientists
not
at this
unanimity.
table.
Let's face it, the IPCC was created in the late 1980s by a bunch of radical eco-freaks like Margaret Thatcher and Brian Mulroney and George Bush, who realized that the science would be hard for policymakers to understand. So they asked the IPCC not to do research, but they appointed the scientists, the IPCC, to advise policymakers and distill the thousands thousands of peer-reviewed articles that are written every single year based on research. And that research piles up to an irrefutable pile of evidence,
Yeah, but
not
it's
beliefs.
evidence based on the last 100 years.
No, it's evidence based on the last million. You can go back
No,
a
it's
million
not.
years worth of CO2 record from Anthropic ice core data.
I have seen
That's
professors from
evidence
the
a
University of
million years.
Ottawa demonstrate that we had much higher carbon content thousands of years ago.
No,
No, we
nothing could
did not.
possibly
We
have
can
done
show
that.
you did not have that.
Yes,
the amount of carbon
I
dioxide
watched
has
the
not
presentation.
been higher than 280 parts per million in over a million years.
It's the fact that science is not completely settled, to me, is not an unreasonable thing to say. I don't think science will ever be fully settled on any number of things. But as humans living in this planet, or policymakers, my field is policy and politics, helping governments choose correct options, sometimes in the absence of complete information. I've sat in cabinet rooms and caucus rooms and whatever. I've never seen governments stop taking decisions even when they didn't have the full information. They act.
We can sit here at this table and argue these issues. You can deny, diminish, deflect, and applaud, and we're not going to come to a conclusion. And I really think this is probably the number one issue that Canada needs to have a serious grip on. It's not hard to figure out.
You know, our government, we own the podium. Do you know where we own the podium at? We own them at the climate conventions, because every year we get the award as the colossal fossil. And this is not
And
from
so does
Greenpeace.
Japan, and so
No,
does
we
Australia.
have won
No,
it
only Canada
almost
gets
every
colossal
year.
fossil.
We weren't going to
They-
meet Kyoto targets. There was never a chance at that stage for us to have
At that
actually put the
stage.
steps in place to have
They've been
met
canceled
met
by
the
then.
targets. The previous Liberal government, I don't want to be partisan, but there wasn't much in the cupboard there. And when the new government came in, it wasn't the same priority. That was clear. But
They were hostile to the
But it
Gordon, a lot of
it wasn't going to meet
European
the
countries that signed didn't deliver either. I don't think we should
The
single
European
Canada. I'm not
countries-
trying to whitewash
Yeah, no, but
Canada, but a lot of other
Canada's- no,
countries
but
didn't come through
we can
that.
single out Canada as the only country that's legally withdrawn from a treaty, and that historically that's the first treaty in the history of
should never
Canada
have
to which
signed
we
it
have
in the
ever
first place.
legally withdrawn from the treaty. That's a different point. The fact that Canada has...
It is.
That's
It's
what,
an
that's how you
important point.
feel about it.
It
No, I
is a
think
different
as a
point.
matter of Canada's good name in the world, that tarnished our reputation. You do not withdraw from legal treaties.
So I'll correct, but
It was
the
an
dilemma-
insane treaty.
No, but I think Conrad's getting to an important point. In terms of Kyoto, it was not a full measure to have actually solved the problem. There were many. They had those. China wasn't a signatory. So
It was a signatory.
Well, I mean,
And it ratified.
the Annex 3 stuff, all of those other kinds of countries that were not going to be caught in the Kyoto web,
That's right.
who are now big polluters.
And Russia
in this
was
sense.
only in to get
That's right.
the credit for having
Yeah.
shrunk by half because its country disintegrated. So we get a cash
So
payoff.
Canada and Kyoto and money and possibly even China when we come back from this. So, droughts in Florida, fires in Australia, hurricanes in New York, floods in Alberta. Let's put the eco back in economics a little bit here and do some math and follow the money. So I understand the cost of the flood in Alberta, according to the provincial finance minister, is now estimated at $6 billion. How are the insurance companies coping with the weather?
Premiums will rise, to compensate, or you won't be able to get insurance products for the kinds of things that for these extreme weather events. The National Roundtable issued a report a few years back before we were shut down that said that the impacts of global climate change, so these are global emissions on Canada, the economic impacts in 2050 could be as high as 41 billion, although there's an even 5% chance. And we looked at the probabilities that it could be up to 91 billion, because to some degree there's uncertainty. These are not from our emissions. These are from global emissions that impact on us. So that suggests to me that we have an economic interest. As you said, you want to put that piece back into it in terms of getting global emissions down, not just in terms of meeting our own targets for 2020, for which we are really woefully off track.
And why was the roundtable shut down?
Because we talked about climate change.
Yes.
And that's
I think-
converse to the current government's economic policy?
Well, I have to be a little careful.
Well, I'll jump in there because he says ahead. No, I
I'm
think
just
I think
wondering.
it's killing sophisticated, formal discussion about these issues.
In terms of what energy is costing the taxpayers, what does, how are
Forget
we
about the
subsidizing
taxpayers.
the oil companies?
What does it cost to you? And if you would have invested in Suncor, Cenovus, Canadian Natural Resources, the engines of economic growth that was going to transform us into an energy superpower, you'd have lost about 50% of your money, okay? That's not the IPCC. That's the Toronto Stock Exchange, okay? Now, if you agree with Conrad and you think this is all a BS, I invite you to double down and invest in Suncor, and invest in Cenovus, and invest in TransCanada Pipeline and Enbridge.
So what are you buying,
So,
Jeff?
you know
What are you buying? I want to know
Well,
what
I'll
you're
tell
buying.
you what I'm shorting.
No, I want to know what
I'm
you're buying.
shorting carbon.
What's hot on the energy
And the
side?
rest of
But
the
the facts
index
support
is what's doing the heavy lifting.
The facts also support Jeff in many ways, and that's why it is a balloon up there. It's a boutique market. Is that it's costing more and more to get it out of the ground. It's taking more and more energy. You're having to build pipelines and railways, and there's other alternatives. There are other alternatives coming in, and Canada doesn't want to burst the bubble, but they know damn well that this thing isn't economic, and there's no way that
You've
the
heard of
customer
the
at the end
shale
of the day is going to buy
revolution
this
that's
stuff.
going on south of the
It's
border.
not just you throw these straw men out there or these red herrings to
No,
try and get us all to
that's
chase them.
not a red herring.
We're not talking about that. No,
That's
but
not a red herring.
It is in terms of this.
Not for the tar sands.
There
it's not
are
a red herring.
alternatives that are cheaper than the tar
No,
sands.
but
Let's
almost
talk about
everywhere around the
alternatives
world.
for a second. Conrad, if you were the energy industry, you're a money guy.
Yeah, would you invest in it?
Wouldn't you hedge your bets and want to be exploring all the alternatives
Yeah,
and
I
not
want
just
to
a
defend
couple?
myself against the imputation of recommending the stocks that Jeff
Well,
told us
that's
to
a
short. I
natural
wouldn't buy any
corollary
of
of
them.
would you
saying this is
invest
all
in it?
BS, isn't it?
No, well, maybe to you, but it isn't in fact a sequel in my own thoughts, but which is what you were, I think, commenting on. But I agree with you. I think the oil price is going down, so I don't think oil stocks are a buy right now. It's a pollution issue, in my opinion, and that we all have to. And everything you said, Mark, about, I mean, I think you're overstating the problem with mercury in fish and so forth. I think that's gone down. I think Donna was absolutely right. Water quality and air quality are much better than they were 50 years ago in this part of the world, around the Great Lakes, for example.
We can do another show on that.
Yeah, no, but I'm not saying it's perfect. But my point is to defend the quality and improve the quality and sanitize the quality of air, water, and soil. I think any sane person agrees with that.
Right.
And I will not yield to anybody here in my enthusiasm for that.
The impact in terms of pollution just in Canadian tourism is a huge deal.
The reason that tourism is down, but it's not because people care about the tar sands. Fort McMurray wasn't the leading destination of tourists coming to Canada. I'll tell you what it was about. It was about the currency appreciating to $1, $1.10, and all of a sudden that $120 hotel room at Banff, not Fort McMurray, Banff or Whistler, cost $200. And that's why tourism dropped by 50%, but the appreciation of that currency had everything to do with Stephen Harper's vision of Canada becoming an energy superpower.
Too bad Stephen Harper can't count the temporary foreign workers going to Fort McMurray as tourists. It would improve his statistics.
Too bad Elizabeth May isn't Prime Minister of
Well,
Canada.
thank you, Jeff. Yeah.
My boss, Robert
Negative
Kennedy
growth.
Jr., makes this argument, though, all the time, that slavery, too, was free labor, and they thought they couldn't live without it. It would kill the
I know,
economy.
but it's a rhetorical statement that has little meaning to the question I posed.
No, and they got rid of it. And guess what happened? The economy's exploded for 200 years. Entrepreneurs rushed in to fill that void and actually created wealth and made it a better society. This is the sort of thing we need to consider when we're talking about carbon. This country doesn't need to deflect the argument and say, oh, well, China's doing it, therefore there's nothing we can do. We don't need to diminish it and say it's just about CO2 and that's natural. You should look at all the impacts. We don't need to deny it because it is happening.
But
And
where's
we don't
the
need to
next
apply
big
it as the
fuel?
government just did.
Where are we gonna
What
find
we
this?
need to do is ask ourselves, what are we going to do to have clean water and clean air in this country for the next 100 years, and how are we going to structure our economy? Do you want to be leaders? Do you want to be followers? Do you want to be
But as this
wealthy and
gentleman
happy,
just said,
or do you
where's
want to
the
just...
next
Where's
fuel?
the next fuel?
Okay, well, we're going to talk
that's a
about
rhetorical
alternative
question.
energy
No, it's not
in
a
the next
rhetorical
break.
question. Because if we
Okay,
can't
team.
find a substitute, we're not going to be
Coming
able to
up,
grow.
alternative
natural gas
energy.
in our pipeline.
Let's go to break.
Natural gas. And we're replacing
The government tells us that the Alberta oil sands are the largest development on the planet. And of course, the economic ramifications of that are enormous. But there are also enormous social and ecological impacts, which I think have been ignored.
In the last 40 years, the development that occurred in the tar sands region has gone out of proportion. It is at a rate right now where your government fails to recognize the fact that we have a problem.
Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Quebec, These are all First Nations words. That is where Canada came from. We are here. We made a deal with these people. We are breaking our promise. We are killing these people. The blood of these people will be on modern Canada's hands.
So the energy economy is increasingly having to find new ways to get at the fuel, and they're often encroaching on Aboriginal land. So what should the government do when they're suddenly getting into land masses in areas where it's harder, it's more expensive, and we're suddenly dealing with treaty rights just trying to find new fuel?
They have to talk to people. I mean, the basic method in a democracy is to engage and persuade and listen to other points of views and try to find a way forward. Try to find a way to forge a consensus, which is not unanimity. A consensus isn't unanimity, but it is a way forward.
Energy efficiency and conservation will get us a long way while we build up some of the other alternatives.
And you came here by bike today, I'll bet.
I came here by train, but that's fine. I had to come from Ottawa. The bike wouldn't have worked.
And to add to that, technology and innovation making it happen anyways. Google's coming up with all kinds of software where I could turn the lights off in my house now. I can have a program that only turns the heat up to 70 degrees when there's people in the house, and it turns it down. You could through technology and innovation and cars, they're going to reduce, but all of it's going to reduce the need to buy this stuff.
So there's lots of alternatives: solar, wind, tidal, geothermal, fuel cells, lots of innovation despite a lot of serious, and I mean serious, investment. And green tech is not without its detractors. And one of the biggest critics of wind turbines is Lord Moncton, a writer, a businessman, and inventor. Let's see what he has to say.
The primary reason why windmills began to become fashionable was that it was thought that the wind gives you free energy, and all we have to do is put up a windmill and capture the free energy, and everybody will have more or less free electricity. They only deliver 24% of their rated capacity on average, because a lot of the time the wind either doesn't blow at all or blows too hard for them to operate safely. And because the wind doesn't blow all the time, they have to maintain, to keep the national grid going when the wind isn't blowing, power stations which are often inefficient and certainly running at what's called spinning reserve, where they use very nearly the same amount of CO2, or they emit nearly the same amount, as if they were running to generate electricity. You also have the windmills themselves killing large numbers of big game birds, eagles, ospreys, hawks, that kind of bird, and also bats. But the left want them because they industrialize the countryside, and that changes the pattern of voting towards the left, because they depend heavily on public subsidy rather than standing on their own 2 feet. So politically, these windmills are attractive to the left.
Whether you like Lord Moncton or not, windmills produce almost as much CO2.
No, it's
not much energy.
Sorry.
And not much energy. They're unreliable. There is a reason we
Denmark
stopped
is-
using
Professor,
windmills.
yeah, Denmark produces 20% of its electricity from wind turbines,
But 80% from coal.
Exports it,
But you know-
and 80% from coal.
But Denmark is-
Denmark is not the
But-
poster child that you should
You're
point
not listening.
to.
Denmark
I am
is
listening.
working with Norway, so the excess wind from Denmark is pumped to Norway so that Norway can pump its water up to reservoirs and release it when it needs it. So you need certain synergies. You need to figure out how to get wind energy and convert it from peak load to base load. And there's a lot of technology going on around the world to make that happen.
The technology is not sufficiently progressed enough to actually take on enough of the grid to provide the kind of energy
There's another
shift
aspect of David. They are very noisy, Gordon. It is noise pollution.
so
When
is the
they
Model
actually
T
are functioning, they're
Ford.
extremely noisy.
Yeah,
There's
beyond the
nothing you
local
can do
stuff,
about
which
that.
is absolutely a problem for people.
But it
Nobody
doesn't
wants
mean
it
that
in
there
their
can't be
backyard.
continuing
No.
innovation all the time.
That's right. And
The
if,
innovations, the photovoltaic cells for roofing tiles, these are things that are real, and the geothermal.
And batteries.
the
We need
potential-
lots of batteries.
Well, that's one of the things Stephen
The
Chu,
battery
when he
power is a
was the
problem.
Minister of Energy,
Big
Secretary of
batteries.
Energy in the United States, that's one of the things he was researching. But
Really
compressed
big.
air could
There's
also
nothing
be
wrong with
effective.
really big batteries.
No, I don't
is
agree
there?
with it. Yeah, right.
I mean, if we could get it,
We get them.
Yeah.
there's nothing
Okay.
intrinsically wrong with
All
storing
right.
energy.
But Lord Moncton went on about subsidies. Let's just have a little reality check. According to the International Energy Agency, subsidies to renewables were $30 billion globally. Subsidies to fossil fuels in the same year, $300 billion globally.
So I'm really looking forward to this moment in the show because we're inviting Dale Goldhawk. He's a feisty consumer advocate, and he knows how to move things forward. Dale Goldhawk.
Thank you, Denise. Well, now that everyone's in full agreement, I'd like to talk about a couple of battles that I've been involved in. We fought back and we won against two giant, ugly holes in the ground. Mere mortals against the big suits in government and high finance. In one battle, Dump Site 41, politicians wanted to dig a hole right on top of a massive pure water aquifer, a major source of drinking water. Dig the hole and fill it with garbage. What could possibly go wrong? In the other fight, a wealthy American hedge fund planned to excavate 2,300 acres of prime farmland and operate an open-pit limestone mine. We called it the Mega Quarry. The hole would be right on top of the headwaters of 5 rivers in Ontario. Good luck, we said to everybody downstream. Both these battles started with just a few people and grew to many thousands. We passed a hat, held bake sales and potluck suppers, sold T-shirts to raise money for protest signs. We borrowed farm wagons as platforms for rallies. Meantime, the whole people hired lawyers, PR flacks, and consultants. In the end, the environment won. And not because it was being protected by the government, but because people, those mere mortals, saw their duty as citizens. They found out that at least once in a while, democracy can plug a hole.
Well done, Dale. Thanks very much.
You're welcome.
Okay, keep up the fight. We'll be back in just a minute. Good job. We can agree on, and I think one of the things we can agree on is that shouldn't we do something? Donna, if you had your total options, total power at your control, what would you do tomorrow to address the conversation we've been having today?
I think we should be smart about what we do. I think we should be very careful that we're spending our money wisely because there's limited money in the world. And we live in a world where 6 million people 6 million children under the age of 5 die every year. And the idea that we should spend tons of money to do things that might affect the climate 100 years from now, while those 6 million children are dying every year now, I think that's a moral outrage.
I think the children are the reason that we may actually need to do something. And so to get emissions down, to try to make progress on this, taking into account both the environment and the economy, as somebody has said, we have to find a way to marry Mother Nature with Father Greed. And so I'd put a price on carbon. Let the market sort itself out. Let innovation reign. Let technologies come to the fore. Let's not have government engineering to the extent possible in terms of diktat and say this is the way to go. You know, do we want to wait? If the science is right, then that problem is going to be more profound later on, and it's going to cost us more to deal with it.
I agree very much with what David just said. I think, first of all, the issue of the science of climate change is irrefutable. But I think we really need to build the, let's say, an open dialogue discussion so we can have the full interplay on these kind of issues, support scientists of all kinds, economists, social scientists, climate scientists, because we need to work together on this thing.
I think before the full bursting of the carbon bubble, we might see a 70 to 75 cent Canadian dollar. That will breathe new life into a hollowed manufacturing sector in Ontario and Canada. I think the center of economic gravity will shift back to central Canada. But unfortunately, Alberta will face a fiscal challenge of proportions the likes of which they have not seen in the post-war period. And I think that's really the people who will bear the costs of the carbon bubble bursting.
I'd like to see a commitment to do a cost-benefit analysis. And when I say a cost-benefit analysis, I don't just mean from a purely economic perspective, but I also would like to see the politicians and the scientists who have, if you will, accepted global warming or climate change or whatever they're going to call it tomorrow, basically consider the fact that when they recommend to politicians to do certain things and to execute their plans without consultation with what I guess they label deniers, that they are leaving out a huge chunk of the population, and that huge chunk of the population should play an equal role in determining whether or not we are prepared to pay the sacrifice that they want us to pay.
Well, as a member of the Canadian Parliament, which is the biggest honor I've ever had, I'd like to see us have a grown-up conversation in that place about energy policy, about climate policy. I'd like to have a respectful discourse in which we actually figure out if these are the targets we're taking on, how do we achieve them, how do we create the greatest number of jobs for every unit of energy we produce, whether it's fossil or wind or whatever it is, and how do we ensure Canada's energy security, and how do we do that responsibly so that we can again be a leader in the world in moving towards the kind of policy that ensures that our kids have a livable world. That's what we should be doing as parliamentarians.
The greatest challenges to humanity can only be met by a free and industrious people. And what my concern is that behind the environmental movement is what I call soft totalitarianism, which is at its root very undemocratic. When people say sustainability, we all have a certain idea of what that means. What I suspect is meant by sustainability is we need to ban private property. We need to get people out of their cars and into public transit. We need to get people out of their houses. We need to take away their appliances. We need to have people living in anthills. And this dystopia, if it takes root, we'll never be able to meet any challenges, environmental degradation or otherwise.
Okay. I'm not sure how to respond to that. Mark?
Right, well, where should we go? I think this is the easiest question I've been asked all day. 25 years as an environmental lawyer and now 15 years full-time environmental advocate. It's pretty clear what we need to do is find consensus, and I think we have that at the table. Everybody, has a vision of swimmable, drinkable, fishable water. They want it. If they're rich, they buy places on the water. If they don't have a lot of money, they travel a long way for it. Everybody wants not to make their children sick if they go swimming or if they eat a fish, and everybody wants clean drinking water. And the way you do that is you set up a forum where you have adult discussions based on real science and real evidence, and you have rules that ultimately hold people accountable. And if we do that at the grassroots level, at the local level, with a vision of swimmable, drinkable, fishable water, the issues with respect to climate change, we'll deal with them, will ultimately fall into place. We're not going to destroy the world if we don't destroy our backyard.
Conrad?
I think we all agree, as Mark said, on what we want, but how to balance the different interests and how to do what is on balance best does require a tremendous amount of analysis, and it requires Solomonic judgment, and it requires strong leadership. And I don't think that, and here I think I'm agreeing with Elizabeth, that we have had that. You speak as a member of the Canadian Parliament. I have the honor of being a member of the British Parliament, and I want to agree with you, one of the finest debates I've ever heard, and certainly one of the most distinguished I ever had the privilege of participating in, was the environmental discussion we had in the House of Lords. And it was a brilliant discussion. There were no whips. There was no partisan interest at all. And we, as you would expect, got a tremendous range of views. But I think this sort of thing, I'm not holding us out as a group that's any great beacon to anyone, but this sort of exchange has got to be the kind of, as you say, conversation the country has to have.
Well, and I agree, that we need big leadership and we need the will to actually get it through. I'm trying to balance my optimism and pessimism because I am very nervous about climate change, climate disruption. And on the other hand, I'm very buoyant about the opportunities for innovation, and maybe it's a pipe dream, but if we could ever get big oil and big green and big money and big policy to actually be at that table you discussed.
A round table.
A round table. And figure it out with, the proper goals in mind. I think Canada could be an absolute leader on this. lives, and we should be a leader and regain our place in the world there. So, there's another subject solved on the Zoomer. Next week, world peace. Okay, so Conrad, I think we're going to be able to still share a dressing room, but
Yeah, unfortunately, not much dressing or undressing goes on in that.
yeah, so that's why I've noticed. Okay, so this is a really important discussion, and I would encourage you all to have it with each other and with your elected officials. So we're back with rock star Randy Bachman. Don't go away. Thank you for that. Very good. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Wow, it's a Hall of Fame award coming up in just a couple of weeks for BTO. Long time coming.
Yes,
With
thank
this is going to be crazy. It's in Winnipeg. You won't even be able to make a speech.
So you can't go home, but we're going home to quite a party.
You are. So Randy's got a new book out, and we're going to talk about that. But before that, we've been talking about the environment here, Randy, and we had a clip from Neil Young, who was talking about the Athabasca Chippewa and First Nations. What do you think when you see celebrities really standing up for what they believe in? Because Neil got a bit of flack for that.
He's always done that. You know, 4 Days in Ohio, he's always written the song immediately and gone out there and put his pretty much career and future on the line. And you got to give him credit for that. I think a certain fraction or amount of the people would listen to him because he speaks from the heart and from experience, and he's seen it all. So he might get some people to listen to him or take notice rather than the press or the parental thing telling kids things. You know what I mean? He just wanted to get people thinking, I think, and provoke them and into discussion and talking about it. And his big line was honor the treaties that already exist. So
Right. Not so hard to figure out.
no,
Yeah,
pretty simple.
on one level,
On
not
one
so
level,
hard to
on one level,
understand.
yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you've been, I mean, American Woman was one of those songs that got a lot of different interpretations,
It was
right?
an anti-war song.
Right. Tell us the story about writing that song.
Well, it was in Kitchener-Waterloo and in a curling rink, a typical Canadian dance in February. And I broke a string on stage. Didn't have a tech, had to change my own string. Didn't have a tuner, you know, like these days they have tuners.
Right.
So Burton said, Randy broke a string, we're going to take a break. So I got on my knees on the left side of the stage where his piano was, in the dark, was playing the notes on the piano and tuning up my guitar, right, getting my guitar to the. When I got to this, and I went. That's what happened. The audience started, their heads snapped around. I went, oh my goodness, I can't stop playing this. If I stop playing it, I'll forget it. It's very, very simple. And I was just tuning the guitar. And so I stood up, I'm on stage alone, and I got the drummer on stage and the bass player, you know, Jim and Gary. And then Burton came running on stage after the fact, and I said, sing something, sing anything. And there's a thing when you're writing music, if you sing any silly lyrics to it, like Paul McCartney using scrambled eggs for Yesterday, it helped him remember da 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 da. So I just said to Burton, sing anything, and the first thing he yelled was American Woman, Stay Away From Me.
And I remember when Lenny Kravitz covered it.
That was great.
Yeah, and I was at Much Music at the time, and we arranged for Lenny Kravitz to play with you. And it was crazy because the managers got involved. They're like, oh, that'll never happen, because Randy's goes, dun, dun, da, 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 and then Lenny's goes, da, 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 and there was a big, and he plays it in a different key, and suddenly it was impossible, and the musicians got together and it worked.
I know, musicians always kind of work things out. The managers fight things out. So.
Right, yeah. Well, that's what they're paid for, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, one of the questions I ask you in here is, what would you have been if you weren't a successful musician?
And my answer?
An unsuccessful musician. I know. It's a great story.
Because I knew at the age of 5 that I played classical violin at the age of 5. I remember grade 1 in school. The teacher, they would do a seating plan. So they would draw the squares and they would go, row 1, seat 1, what's your name? My name is Denise Donlan. And what does your daddy do? Well, he's a fireman or a policeman or whatever. And that's how they do the seating plan. So when it got to me, what's your name? Randy Bachman. What's your dad do? He's an optician. What do you want to be when you grow up? I said, I'm a musician.
Already?
Yes, but what do you want to be when you grow up? I'm a musician. What do you want to be when you grow up? Ran home. I lived a block and a half from school. This is Victory School in the north end of Winnipeg. I ran home the first day of school. My mother's doing the laundry, and she says, "What are you doing home? Is school out?" And I said, "No, I quit." I keep giving the answer to the questions, and it's wrong, and it's the only answer I know. So she took me back to school and explained to the teacher that I had been playing violin, and I was a musician, and then that was that.
They want to know in the book, and you answered, you ever going to retire?
No, there's no stop button here. We are minstrels. We're the old-fashioned minstrels that went town to town. We don't make any money selling records anymore. It's all stolen and moved around the internet. But we go town to town and play and sing for our suppers, so to speak, and it's a lot of fun.
Long may you rock,
Thank you.
my
I will.
friend. Well done. Thanks, Randy. And you can see Randy if you're in Toronto at Massey Hall on March 15th. Have a great time in Winnipeg.
Thank you.
And I'll see you at your next
See you
gig.
later.
Thanks, Randy.
Okay.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
The Ukraine will become more homogeneous, will be heavily assisted by Germany, and will join the West. The crisis in the Ukraine has always been the frictions between the Western, especially German, influence in Eastern Europe and the Russian, as these two powerful historic influences ebb and flow, often violently. That friction is one of the reasons that the Ukrainians have had the most tragic history of any people in Europe, except the Jews. Stalin massacred 10% of their population in the 30s, and Hitler and Stalin between them murdered 20% of the survivors in the 40s. As the entire Ukraine was pulverized by the German and Soviet armies that crisscrossed it 5 times. The Russians occupied the Ukraine for 200 years. About the same time, the Germans and Russians and Austrians occupied Poland. In the one case, as in the other, the spirit of the nationality was unextinguishable. Despite the weakness of Western leaders, the absurd threats of red lines and so forth, Russia is not strong enough to subdue all of the Ukraine, and the most Putin can do is take in some of the Russian ethnic fringe. The Ukraine will become more homogeneous, will be heavily assisted by Germany, and will join the West. Enfeebled and indifferently led though most of the major Western countries are, we are still a magnet of freedom and prosperity in comparison with Putin's Russian thug state, brutalized by its government and milked by the regime's oligarchic friends. Of all the false starts of the Obama administration, and there have been many, few loom more absurd today than Joe Biden's promise to hit the reset button with Russia. Only Russia can do that.
Next week on the show, angels, the afterlife, and near-death experiences. And we're going to also have an interview with Karen Kane. And for everyone in the audience, Jeff Rubin's latest book, The End of Growth.
It's a brilliant book.
Have a great week, everyone. Let's zoom out.